What happens when someone who knew Princess Diana personally, someone who watched her rise, stumble, fight, and transform the monarchy forever, finally decides to speak publicly about her youngest son? Not with softness, not with nostalgia, but with a blunt, razor-sharp honesty that slices straight through the royal PR machine. That's what happened when Tina Brown, the former editor of Vanity Fair, author of some of the most revealing royal biographies, and one of Diana's closest journalistic confidants, stepped forward and uttered the words that sent shockwaves through both the royal establishment and the Hollywood circles Harry and Meghan now desperately want to belong to. "Harry is not the brightest bulb," she said. A line delivered without hesitation, without apology, without any attempt to soften the blow. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. And if that wasn't enough, she followed it up with something even more brutal. "I have never seen anybody in professional life make as many mistakes as Meghan has." It was the kind of criticism that doesn't just sting, it leaves a scar. Because Tina Brown is not some random commentator. She is not a tabloid writer hiding behind gossip. She's not a Twitter thread, a YouTube commenter, or a late-night satirical host poking fun for laughs. She is a woman who documented Diana's rise, who understood that family from the inside out, and who watched, up close, how the pressures of royalty collide with personality, ambition, and ego. So when she speaks, people pay attention. But here's the real question. Why now? Why, of all times, would Tina Brown unleash a statement so sharp it sliced through the Sussex brand like a hot knife through butter? Because something has changed, something big. Hollywood is turning. Executives are whispering. Industry leaders, people who once clapped politely at the Sussex's entrance, are now rolling their eyes the moment their names are mentioned. The tide is shifting, and Tina Brown's comments weren't just random observations. They were an echo of a larger sentiment brewing behind closed doors, in boardrooms, in studios, in strategy meetings, and yes, even within royal circles. Harry and Meghan have been labeled many things over the years. Rebels, disruptors, outsiders, brave truth-tellers. But recently, the descriptors took a darker, more embarrassing turn. Grifters, a flop, professionally lost, chaotic. Words you never want associated with your brand, especially if your brand depends entirely on public perception. The Spotify executive who said they were grifters wasn't joking. The Netflix insiders who whispered they didn't get what they paid for weren't exaggerating. And industry veterans who once gave them the benefit of the doubt are now asking a simple, devastating question. What exactly do Harry and Meghan bring to the table besides drama? But before we dive into that collapse, before we dissect the deals, the botched opportunities, the failed launches, the missteps, the PR disasters, the misjudgments, and the increasingly strange choices, there's something deeper we need to explore. Something that goes beyond contracts, beyond public image, beyond the surface-level mistakes. There is a psychological, emotional, almost tragic undercurrent to this story, one that starts long before Meghan ever stepped into Harry's life. A current that begins with Diana. Now, let's slow down for a moment. You and I both know that Princess Diana remains one of the most iconic, beloved, and misunderstood figures of the modern era. She was adored and studied in equal measure. She understood fame, she understood manipulation, and she understood personal branding long before the word branding even existed in mainstream conversation. She learned the hard way that fame is a double-edged sword, one that cuts both the wielder and the target. She once told a friend something chilling, something that now feels hauntingly connected to Harry's present situation. A warning, a fear, a prediction, and that prediction, according to those closest to her, including Tina Brown, may be unfolding right in front of our eyes. But before we get there, before we revisit Diana's warning and how it eerily mirrors Harry's current downfall, we must understand the present moment. Because this story isn't just about Tina Brown's opinion. It's not about a single quote tossed into the wind. It's about timing. And timing, in situations like this, is everything. The moment Tina spoke, public sentiment was shifting. The Sussexes weren't riding high on Oprah headlines anymore. They weren't basking in the glow of multi-million-dollar deals or global sympathy or the success of a fairy tale American reinvention. They were struggling. Think about it. One failed Spotify deal, A lukewarm Netflix slate. A docuseries that started strong and then evaporated from public memory. A children's book that made headlines for the wrong reasons. A podcast that was accused of using fake guests. A media empire that never materialized. And behind each of these failures, a decision, a choice, a mistake. Sometimes Harry's, sometimes Meghan's, often both. And this is where Tina Brown's insight becomes more than just commentary. It becomes context. Because Tina didn't just say Meghan made mistakes. She said she has never seen anyone in professional life make as many mistakes as Meghan. That is not a casual remark. That is a clinical assessment from someone who has watched celebrities, politicians, CEOs, and public figures navigate fame and failure for decades. It is a diagnosis of a pattern, one that grows clearer with each passing year. But the bombshell was not that Meghan makes mistakes. It was that Harry, in Tina's view, either cannot see those mistakes or cannot stop them. Not the brightest bulb. It's a harsh phrase, one that cuts down to the bone, one that paints a picture not of malice, but of naivety, confusion, impulsiveness, and emotional volatility. And here's where the audience needs to lean in, because whether you agree or disagree, Tina Brown did not pull that statement out of thin air. She based it on observable patterns. Interviews Harry never should have given, statements he never should have made, battles he never should have fought, alliances he never should have formed, and decisions that seemed less strategic and more reactive, more emotional, more rooted in hurt than logic. And isn't that the contradiction at the heart of Harry's story? The boy who lost his mother, the man who said he hated the press, the duke who said he wanted privacy, and yet, the same man who publishes a memoir revealing intimate family details, who does Netflix confessionals, who does Oprah interviews, who spills secrets on documentaries, who narrates his trauma over and over again for the world to dissect. Privacy through publicity, distance through exposure, healing through profitable storytelling. It is the contradiction that defines him. But now here's where things get interesting. Because this introduction isn't about assigning blame. It's about setting the stage for something much bigger, something more complex, something that Tina Brown hinted at, but did not fully unpack. Hollywood insiders believe that Harry and Meghan's downfall was not accidental. It was inevitable, built into the foundation from the moment they left the royal family without a long-term plan, measurable goals, or a clear identity beyond victimhood. But is that entirely fair? Or is it more accurate to say their downfall was a combination of emotional wounds, unchecked ambition, poor counsel, and a misunderstanding of how the modern media landscape actually works? Let's pause. Ask yourself this. If you were Harry, hurt, grieving, resentful, emotionally raw, would you have made better decisions? Or would you, too, have clung to the first person who seemed to offer clarity, validation, and direction, even if that direction led straight off a cliff? That's the complexity Tina Brown is pointing toward. The vulnerability behind the chaos. The personal wound beneath the professional disaster. And yet, none of this excuses the consequences. Choices have weight, and the weight is finally catching up. Deals are slipping. Influence is fading. Sympathy is thinning. And Hollywood, an industry built on profit, not pity, is losing patience. Deals get canceled. Invitations stop coming. Interest disappears. That is the reality the Sussexes now face. So why does Tina Brown's voice matter? Why did her comments hit so hard? Because she was one of the first to say publicly what insiders have been whispering privately for months. Harry and Meghan's so-called empire is not an empire. It's a storyline, one that is starting to lose viewers. But before we dive into the industry collapse, the burned bridges, and the reputational damage, before we examine the Spotify fiasco, the Netflix disappointments, and the internal executive memos, there is one more thing you need to know. This story matters now because the cracks are no longer cracks. They're fractures. And fractures grow. Fast. And what's coming next? Let's just say, Tina Brown wasn't finished. And what she revealed next would not only redefine how the public sees Harry and Meghan, it would expose a deeper truth about Diana's legacy that no one saw coming. It started with a single sentence. One sentence that cracked open a conversation people in royal and Hollywood circles had been whispering for months, but were too afraid to say out loud. One sentence that didn't just sting, it detonated. Harry is not the brightest bulb. When Tina Brown said it, the room changed. The temperature dropped. Even the journalists interviewing her shifted slightly in their seats, unsure whether to gasp, laugh, or ask her to repeat it just to confirm they weren't imagining things. This wasn't a blogger. This wasn't a fringe commentator. This was Tina Brown, former editor of Vanity Fair, author of two of the most influential royal biographies ever written, a woman who has never needed shock value to stay relevant. When she speaks, she is deliberate, measured, surgical, and she had just dissected Prince Harry with a single phrase. But here's the part no one was prepared for. She said it without hesitation. No pause. No polite royal phrasing. No tiptoeing. It was almost casual, as if she were stating a fact she assumed everyone already agreed with. And maybe they did. But why does this sentence matter so much? Why did it explode across headlines, across podcasts, across television panels, and social media threads? Because Tina Brown was not criticizing a random celebrity. She was speaking about the son of the woman she admired, Princess Diana. A son she had watched grow up under suffocating cameras, under public scrutiny, under the weight of unimaginable trauma. And her bluntness signaled one thing. She believes Harry is in real trouble. Not just a PR dip. Not just a career misstep. Something deeper. Something foundational. Let's rewind the tape for a moment. Let's go back to why Tina Brown's voice carries so much weight in the first place. Tina Brown is one of those figures who doesn't need to boast about her experience. Her resume does the talking. She's the woman who revived Vanity Fair, turning it into the glossy, provocative cultural staple it is today. She's the biographer who spent years combing through diaries, interviews, letters, and insider conversations to piece together the emotional, political, and psychological labyrinth of the modern monarchy. She wasn't just analyzing Diana. She was living in her world, understanding her patterns, watching her navigate fame and survival. She noticed details others missed. She heard things others ignored, and she stored them. When she wrote The Diana Chronicles, it wasn't just a biography. It was a psychological X-ray of a woman trapped between love, duty, rebellion, and trauma. Her portrayal of Diana wasn't perfect, but it was intimate, nuanced, sharp, the kind of writing only someone with deep access and even deeper insight could produce. And now, all these years later, Tina Brown has shifted that same level of scrutiny onto Harry and Meghan. That alone should make anyone sit up straighter. Because she's not guessing. She's not speculating from afar. She's watching patterns repeat themselves. She's connecting the dots from Diana's emotional turbulence to Harry's current meltdown. And she's saying what many fear is true. Harry does not understand the game he is playing. That's the real meaning behind, not the brightest bulb. It's not about intellectual IQ. It's about emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and the ability to navigate complicated systems, political, media, cultural, without sabotaging yourself in the process. And if there's one thing Tina Brown has observed over the last few years, it's that Harry has been walking into traps he himself laid. But let's slow down for a moment. Let's sit with a simple question. Why would someone like Tina Brown, who respected Diana deeply, speak of Harry this way? Isn't this harsh? Isn't this risky? After all, any criticism of Harry instantly becomes global news. And that is exactly why her words matter. Tina Brown is not reckless. She is not emotional. She is not impulsive. She speaks with precision. If she's saying Harry is not the brightest bulb, it means she's studied the pattern long enough to see a dangerous trajectory. A trajectory others in Hollywood now see as well. Let's talk about that trajectory, because it didn't appear overnight. It formed piece by piece, interview by interview, decision by decision. And Tina Brown was watching. After Diana's death, the world looked at Harry as the fragile one, the emotional one, the vulnerable one. William became the stoic future king. Harry became the spirited spare, the one who could be spontaneous, rebellious, fun. But somewhere along the line, somewhere between adolescence and adulthood, Harry's spontaneity hardened into impulsiveness. His independence morphed into defiance. His grief curdled into resentment. And resentment is a terrible compass. Contrast that with the environment he was raised in. The monarchy is not built on feelings. It's built on calculation, on strategy, on silence, on discipline, on waiting. It's a chessboard. And Harry was never taught to play chess. He was taught to play rugby. That's the fundamental mismatch. And it is exactly what Tina Brown is pointing to when she says he's not the brightest bulb. But here's the emotional twist. Tina Brown does not say this from a place of cruelty. She says it because she believes Harry is outmatched by Meghan. Not intellectually, strategically. Meghan understands narrative. Meghan understands branding. Meghan understands public perception. She was an actress in an industry where image is currency. She played the Hollywood game before she ever stepped foot into the monarchy. She knew how to craft a headline, how to perform authenticity, how to command attention. And Tina Brown believes this gave her an advantage over Harry from the beginning. This isn't a judgment. It's an observation. And whether you agree or disagree, there is an uncomfortable truth underneath it. Harry and Meghan entered marriage with two completely different understandings of the world. Harry approached fame as something he wanted to escape. Meghan approached fame as something she wanted to master. Think about that dynamic for a moment. One spouse wants to run away from the cameras. The other wants to use the cameras. One wants privacy. The other wants platform. One sees the media as the enemy. The other sees the media as an opportunity. That is not a partnership. That is a collision course. And Tina Brown, with her years of observing royal marriages, could see the cracks forming long before the public did. Now, let's connect this to Hollywood's shifting perception. When Harry and Meghan first arrived in California, they were treated like royalty, literally and metaphorically. Studios wanted them. Executives wined and dined them. Networks competed for them. They were shiny, new, controversial, profitable. The American market thrives on reinvention, and the Sussexes were the ultimate rebrand story, fleeing the monarchy, building a media empire, telling their truth. But as Tina Brown observed, not all reinventions stick. Especially when they aren't built on substance. Hollywood loves a story, but it loves results more. And what did the Sussexes deliver? One docuseries that created temporary buzz, but no lasting impact. One memoir that sold well, but damaged relationships irreversibly. One podcast that fizzled. One animated series canceled before it even launched. One public image built on exposing pain, but not on creating anything new. This is where industry veterans began using the word grifters. Not because Harry and Meghan are literal con artists, but because, in the eyes of Hollywood, they took the money and delivered very little. And that's where Tina Brown's voice echoes again. Meghan makes too many mistakes, and Harry doesn't see the consequences until it's too late. Let's pose a question to the audience now. If you were a Hollywood executive who invested tens of millions of dollars into a couple who promised creativity, insight, and groundbreaking projects, would you be satisfied with a podcast that barely scratched the surface? Would you be pleased with a documentary that recycled headlines? Would you call that a good return on investment? Hollywood is not sentimental. It is not patient. It is not forgiving. It does not care about trauma unless trauma sells. It does not care about titles unless titles trend. It does not care about royal drama unless royal drama is monetizable. And this is where Tina Brown's warning becomes prophetic. Harry is not navigating Hollywood strategically. He is navigating emotionally. And emotion is a liability in a profit-driven industry. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There is still a deeper reason Tina Brown's words hit so hard. A reason tied not to Hollywood, but to Diana herself. Tina Brown knew Diana's patterns. She saw the emotional cycles, the oversharing, the desperate desire to be understood, the mistrust of the institution, the whirlwind relationships, the media manipulation, the vulnerability disguised as rebellion. And when she looks at Harry, she sees echoes, not just of his mother's charm, but of her self-destructive impulses. The same need to speak out, the same compulsion to expose, the same belief that telling your story will liberate you, when in reality, it often shackles you even more. This is not Harry's fault, but it is Harry's pattern, and Tina Brown knows patterns. So when she says Harry is not the brightest bulb, she is not insulting his intelligence. She is warning us that he is walking into the same emotional traps that once swallowed his mother whole. Only this time. The stakes are different, the platforms are global, and the consequences are more permanent. Now let's take a breath, step back, and ask the question that sits at the heart of this entire chapter. If Tina Brown believes Harry is being outmaneuvered, professionally and emotionally, by forces bigger than him, what does she think happens next? The answer begins with a single phrase she hinted at. one that opens the door to the next chapter of this unraveling story. Because Tina Brown didn't just criticize the past, she predicted the future. And what she predicts next, no one, absolutely no one, saw coming. You know a storm is coming when the people who usually speak in polished, diplomatic tones suddenly start dropping verbal grenades. And that's exactly what happened the moment Tina Brown, normally measured, cautious, and strategically discreet, began publicly dissecting the downward spiral of Harry and Meghan. But here's the twist that nobody expected. She wasn't just criticizing their choices. She was revealing that she had predicted this unraveling years before the public ever saw it happening. That's the chilling part. Tina Brown didn't react to the chaos. She foresaw it. And if you're wondering how that's even possible, the answer is simple. Tina Brown understands patterns. She has studied the royal family for over 4 decades. She has watched kings collapse, queens regain power, heirs transform, marriages implode, public opinion flip, and relationships calcify into resentment. She has seen the monarchy bend, break, and rebuild. She has witnessed the rise of the celebrity era in real time. She has decoded the psychology behind power, fame, trauma, and legacy. So when she speaks about a royal trajectory, she isn't guessing. She is diagnosing. But let's begin with the moment Tina Brown made her first major prediction about Harry. Long before he ever met Meghan, long before he released a memoir, long before he began the war against his family, long before he stepped into California with a Netflix contract in one hand and a grudge in the other. Back in the early 2000s, when Harry was still the lovable, rebellious second son, Tina Brown wrote something that raised eyebrows. She called him emotionally impulsive and noted that without structure, he would struggle to find purpose. It was subtle at the time, but now, it feels prophetic. Ask yourself this. How many public figures, royal or otherwise, have you seen dissolve emotionally the moment they lose an institutional framework? It's more common than you think. Athletes who retire too early, child stars who age out of fame, politicians who lose elections, soldiers who leave service, royal spares who suddenly realize they have freedom but no direction. Tina Brown knew this. She knew the monarchy gave Harry boundaries, identity, and a sense of role, even if he never appreciated it. And she feared what would happen when those boundaries disappeared. Here's where things get interesting. According to Tina Brown, Harry never learned the difference between attention and purpose. Inside the royal family, attention is regulated. Purpose is inherited. Outside the royal family, attention is earned. Purpose must be built. That transition is brutally difficult for someone who grew up being defined by birthright rather than achievement. And Tina Brown suggests that Harry was not prepared for that shift. He mistook public interest for professional demand. He mistook celebrity curiosity for career longevity. He mistook media fascination for respect. Now let's zoom in on the moment she realized things were taking a dangerous turn. It wasn't when Harry stepped down from royal duties. It wasn't when he moved to California. It wasn't even when he sat with Oprah and told the world that his family trapped him. No. According to insiders who spoke to Tina Brown, the real turning point came earlier, when Harry started believing his emotional vulnerability gave him moral superiority. Let that sink in for a moment. Emotional vulnerability is powerful. It can heal. It can transform. It can inspire. But it can also mislead. It can make you believe your pain entitles you to immunity. It can make you believe your trauma is a strategy. It can make you misunderstand sympathy as influence. That's where Tina Brown believes Harry went wrong. She didn't say it with cruelty. She said it with concern, because she had seen the same pattern before. When Princess Diana spoke out about her struggles, her mental health, her affairs, her loneliness, she did so because she wanted to be heard. She wanted the truth out. She wanted freedom. But she also unleashed something she couldn't contain, a media machine that fed on her pain. And once those cameras tasted blood, they never let go. Tina Brown watched Diana battle with exposure. She watched her manipulate the media and then get devoured by it. She watched her try to use the narrative and then become trapped by the narrative. And now she sees Harry doing the same thing, but without Diana's intuition. This is where Tina Brown's comment that Harry is not the brightest bulb gains context. She wasn't insulting his intellect. She was pointing out that he lacks the strategic foresight required to manage fame, media, and influence in a world far more vicious than the one Diana faced. She believes Harry overestimates his understanding of PR, underestimates the consequences of public overexposure, and misunderstands how quickly sympathy turns into fatigue. And then came Meghan, someone Tina Brown describes as incredibly charismatic, incredibly talented, and incredibly impulsive in her own right. According to Tina, Meghan accelerated Harry's emotional impulses rather than grounding them. She amplified the rebellion instead of balancing it. She encouraged Harry's distrust of the institution, but did not prepare him for the harsh reality of life without it. Is that Meghan's fault? Tina Brown doesn't say that directly, but she implies something revealing. Harry didn't just leave the monarchy. He left without a vision. He exited without a plan. He burned bridges without building new roads. And Meghan, already juggling her own professional pressures, wasn't equipped to architect a sustainable empire from scratch. Now here's where the story gets even more compelling. After Oprah, after the docuseries, after the Spotify breakup, after the memoir, Tina Brown said something that made industry insiders freeze. She said, "I warned that this would happen." She warned that the public appetite for Harry's grievances would run out. She warned that Hollywood would not tolerate inconsistency. She warned that constant complaints would erode credibility. She warned that Harry would eventually become the parody of the victim he was trying to portray. It's chilling to realize that this wasn't hindsight. This was foresight. Long before executives started calling Harry and Meghan grifters, Tina Brown had already mapped out the trajectory. Long before Hollywood began distancing itself, she had already pointed to the cracks forming beneath the surface. And here's the emotional heart of this chapter. Tina Brown believes Harry is not a villain. He is not calculating. He is not scheming. He is not malicious. He is simply unprepared. A man with deep trauma, deep anger, deep wounds, and no one strong enough to ground him, guide him, or tell him when he is making irrevocable mistakes. Let's pause and ask a direct question to the audience. Have you ever watched someone you care about step into chaos because they believe their emotions were enough to carry them through? Have you ever seen someone confuse honesty with strategy, pain with purpose, vulnerability with leadership? That's how Tina Brown sees Harry's journey. But we're not done. There's another prediction Tina Brown made, one that has only recently started coming true. She said that the industry would eventually demand results. Storytelling, production quality, vision, leadership, consistency. And when those results didn't come, the industry would turn. Look at what's happening now. Netflix quietly canceling concepts, Spotify cutting ties, executives whispering, producers distancing themselves, invitations drying up, and the word flop entering the conversation. This is where the weight of Tina Brown's prediction hits hardest. Because she didn't just predict the professional fallout, she predicted the psychological fallout. She said Harry would struggle when the world stopped listening. And that moment is arriving faster than anyone expected. But here's the twist. Tina Brown also hinted that none of this is irreversible. That Harry still has a chance to course correct. But he can't do it alone. He needs stability. He needs structure. He needs strategy. He needs a sense of purpose beyond reactionary storytelling. And he needs to understand the difference between being heard and being respected. And just when you think Tina Brown has said everything she could possibly say about Harry, she pivots. Suddenly, sharply, unapologetically, toward Meghan. Because Tina Brown didn't simply predict Harry's unraveling. She predicted Meghan's downfall too. And what she says about Meghan's career is even harsher. And that's where we're headed next. The moment Netflix signed that massive multi-million-dollar deal with Harry and Meghan, the industry buzzed with a strange cocktail of excitement and skepticism. People were curious. Hollywood loves a spectacle. And the Sussexes were the hottest ticket in town. The royal rebels, the couple who walked away from the palace, the pair who promised to reshape storytelling. But behind those glossy headlines and perfectly curated press releases, something far more fragile was happening. Something Tina Brown saw instantly, something she later spoke about with that same matter-of-fact sharpness that made her quotes go viral. When Netflix wrote the check, they weren't buying talent. One insider told her. They were buying the moment. That line, buying the moment, would become the unofficial epitaph of the Sussex-Netflix partnership. Because Hollywood doesn't invest in moments. It invests in momentum. It invests in proof. It invests in people who can deliver again and again, not simply dominate a single news cycle. And the expectation was clear. Netflix wanted content. Quality content. Consistent content. A slate of projects that justified the unprecedented investment. But as time passed, the question insiders began asking was painfully simple. What exactly did Harry and Meghan produce? Let's rewind. When the deal was first announced, Meghan promised an animated series celebrating inspirational women throughout history. It sounded noble, ambitious, uplifting, but it fizzled before it ever reached the storyboard stage. Netflix quietly canceled it. Executives said very little. Hollywood noticed everything. Then there was Harry's documentary idea. Environmental, inspirational, something vaguely corporate, and painfully unsellable. It never materialized. Instead, the only product Netflix received with any real narrative structure was the Harry and Meghan docuseries, a glossy retelling of their grievances, personal conflicts, and emotional wounds. The series launched with enormous buzz, but here's the truth nobody expected. The public moved on quickly. It didn't have the lasting cultural impact Netflix needed. It didn't generate the awards buzz they hoped for. It didn't create the global momentum that production companies rely on. People watched, and then forgot. And as Tina Brown sharply observed, you can't build a career on your exit story alone. But here's where the deeper issue began. Because what Netflix expected wasn't just content. They expected ideas, pitch decks, treatments, concepts, stories, vision. But according to multiple insiders who later spoke to reporters, the Sussex team struggled to deliver even the basics of professional production. One executive said privately, "We were shocked by how unprepared they were." Another said, "They didn't understand the process. They thought their lives were the product." At first, this sounds harsh. But Tina Brown unpacked this in a way only she could. She said something that Hollywood insiders began quoting verbatim. They don't have the creative infrastructure to sustain these deals. They have celebrity, and they think it's enough. It isn't. Let's pause for a moment and ask the audience something. If your reputation is built on your story, what happens when you run out of story? What happens when the public stops being shocked, stops being outraged, stops being curious? Because shock wears off, sympathy fades, curiosity evaporates. And then what? Netflix executives began quietly wondering the same thing. They weren't seeing growth. They were seeing repetition. More grievances, more family drama, more interviews, more emotional retellings. Hollywood has a name for this pattern. Narrative fatigue. But here's the twist. Netflix didn't blame Harry. They blamed Meghan. Some insiders felt she overpromised and underdelivered. Others believed she misunderstood the creative process, thinking passion alone would carry the project. Some claimed she lacked the discipline needed in production, deadlines, revisions, rewrites, structure. And others believed she was stretched too thin, juggling image maintenance, public positioning, legal battles, personal branding, and motherhood all at once. But Tina Brown went further. She said, very bluntly, "I have never seen anyone in professional life make as many mistakes as Meghan has." That quote, sharp, cold, and devastating, didn't come from a place of hatred. It came from a place of analysis. Tina wasn't pointing to one misstep. She was pointing to a pattern. A pattern of miscalculating how Hollywood works, miscalculating how the media cycle behaves, miscalculating what the public actually wants, miscalculating how to sustain relevance beyond the honeymoon phase of rebellion. Let's break down the biggest miscalculation, the idea that leaving the monarchy automatically created a global brand. It didn't. Leaving the monarchy created interest, curiosity, headlines, content. But you don't build an empire on headlines alone. You build an empire on output, consistency, skill, and value. Hollywood doesn't care about your past unless you can turn it into a future. And that was the problem. Harry and Meghan didn't have a future plan. They had a moment, a massive moment, a sensational moment, a lucrative moment, but a moment nonetheless. Tina Brown said something chilling in an interview. The moment passed, and they didn't see it. In those 7 words lies the heart of this chapter. While Meghan was pushing for more interviews, more revelations, more personal storytelling, Hollywood wanted something else entirely. Creativity. Something new. Something visionary. Something that made them more than just former royals airing grievances. Netflix didn't want a sequel to the Oprah interview. They wanted original content. Instead, the Sussexes delivered recycled narratives and shallow concepts. The pressure grew. Executives grew uneasy. And the clock began ticking. Because here's another truth TikTok analysts, PR strategists, and industry veterans point out constantly. The public grows tired of one-note storytelling. And the Sussexes, for all their sincerity, kept telling the same story. We were mistreated. We were misunderstood. We were trapped. We were hurt. The story of escape. The story of protection. The story of survival. The story of freedom. But Netflix didn't pay hundreds of millions for one emotional arc. They paid for a media empire. They expected a Shondaland, a Hello Sunshine, a Bad Robot. Instead, they got two celebrities recounting their trauma and calling it content. And here's the part Tina Brown found most troubling. Meghan didn't seem to recognize the difference between influence and output, between visibility and ability, between fame and skill. This is where industry insiders began using brutal language. Flop, overexposed, bad fit, chaotic, difficult. And one word more painful than all the others. Unbankable. That's the Hollywood kiss of death. Because once that word starts circulating behind closed doors, it spreads. Studios hear it. Producers hear it. Agents hear it. And suddenly, the golden couple isn't golden anymore. But this is just the beginning of the unraveling. Because, as Tina Brown pointed out during a panel discussion, the Netflix fallout was symptomatic of a bigger issue, the professional separation between Harry and Meghan. Harry's content ideas were different, more grounded, more documentary style. Meghan's were aspirational, brand-driven, lifestyle-oriented. Two visions, two creative languages. One company trying to merge them. It was doomed. Netflix executives were confused. Advisors were burned out. Contractors said communication was inconsistent. And Tina Brown, watching from afar, said what many refused to admit. They are out of their depth. And then came the comment that shook the entertainment world. The industry is not interested in their narrative anymore. Think about how devastating that is. The monarchy no longer trusts them. Hollywood no longer needs them. The public no longer believes them. And the industry no longer buys them. This is why the Netflix deal became a symbol, not of success, but of unfulfilled potential. Which brings us to something even more important. Because while Netflix executives were quietly venting their frustrations, while Hollywood insiders whispered about creative shortcomings, while Tina Brown dissected the pattern, something else was happening behind the curtain. A far more damning revelation. Because according to multiple industry sources, Netflix didn't just blame Meghan for the professional chaos. They blamed someone specific for the failure to deliver. Someone they believed caused delays, friction, confusion, and unnecessary drama. Someone whose behind-the-scenes behavior shocked even seasoned executives. And that's where we're headed next. Because the person Netflix insiders pointed to wasn't Meghan. It was Harry. There's a moment in every Hollywood cautionary tale when the public story, the glossy, polished, camera-ready narrative, collides violently with the behind-the-scenes truth. That moment came for Harry and Meghan when Netflix executives, quietly and anonymously, revealed the one thing nobody saw coming. Harry was not the stabilizing force in the partnership. He was the destabilizing one. And you could almost hear Tina Brown whispering, "I warned you." But before we get to the shock that was circulating through studios, let's rewind to the moment everything began turning. Because it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't even public at first. It began with something as simple as confusion. Confusion in meetings. Confusion in planning. Confusion in communication. Confusion in direction. You see, in Hollywood, clarity is power. Executives want to know two things. What is the idea? And can you execute it? It sounds simple, but that simplicity is intentional. The entertainment industry thrives on certainty. Harry and Meghan, however, brought something very different to the table, uncertainty. And that uncertainty had a name. Harry. Here's the shocking part. While the public assumed Meghan was the visionary, Netflix executives claimed it was actually Harry who insisted on approving every detail. Every outline, every storyline, every soundtrack, every angle. At first, this sounded admirable, like he wanted creative control. But there's a huge difference between creative control and creative obstruction. And according to insiders Tina Brown later spoke with, Harry crossed that line repeatedly. He was involved in every meeting, one executive revealed. He questioned everything. He changed direction constantly. It became impossible to move forward. Another said, he wasn't focused. It felt like he was trying to process trauma instead of making television. That's a devastating sentence, because it reveals something deeper than industry frustration. It reveals a man drowning emotionally while trying to build a media empire. Let's pause and ask the audience directly. Have you ever tried to make a major life decision while dealing with unresolved pain? Have you ever tried to create something meaningful while grieving, angry, or overwhelmed? That's what Netflix executives believe was happening behind the scenes. Harry wasn't approaching the projects as a producer. He was approaching them as a wounded son, a disillusioned prince, a man grieving a mother and battling a family feud he still couldn't escape. And Meghan? She wasn't prepared to balance that. Here's where Tina Brown's analysis becomes hauntingly accurate. She said Harry's emotional impulsiveness, something she identified 2 decades ago, was colliding with Meghan's ambition. Meghan was trying to build. Harry was trying to heal. Meghan was trying to pitch. Harry was trying to process. Meghan wanted structure. Harry wanted catharsis. Hollywood can handle ambition. Hollywood can handle chaos. But it cannot handle both at once. Inside the Netflix offices, executives described meetings where Harry would jump from topic to topic, introducing ideas unrelated to the original pitch, derailing the flow, or insisting on revisiting past grievances they had already addressed. Some claimed he used creative sessions as therapy. Others said he brought personal conflicts into discussions that were supposed to be professional. And more than one insider said the same phrase. We didn't know how to work with him. Think about that. They didn't know how to work with him, not because he was rude, not because he was unprepared, but because he was unpredictable. Tina Brown later commented, Harry has been psychologically unanchored. That wasn't an insult, it was an insight. Harry wasn't navigating Hollywood strategically. He was navigating it emotionally, instinctively, reactively. That's a recipe for disaster in an industry built on deadlines and data, not trauma and spontaneity. So while the world focused on Meghan's alleged mistakes, Netflix executives were quietly focusing on Harry's inconsistencies. They said Meghan showed up polished, rehearsed, prepared to deliver. Harry showed up with a storm inside him. He was distracted, said one producer. He second-guessed everything, said another. He would leave meetings abruptly, said a third. And then came the critical turning point. According to insiders, Harry became deeply fixated on how he would be portrayed. Not the projects, not the narratives, not the message, himself. He kept rewriting his own role, one Netflix source said. He didn't want to look privileged. He didn't want to look angry. He didn't want to look lost. He didn't want to look like the villain. But he also didn't want to look too soft. The irony is brutal. Harry didn't want to look like what he was becoming. And this is where Netflix began to panic. Suddenly there were delays, missed deadlines, incomplete scripts, conflicting feedback, confusion over creative direction. Netflix had spent millions, but the Sussexes were still brainstorming, still rethinking, still rewriting history and rewriting again. And according to Tina Brown, this is when Netflix executives realized a painful truth. Harry and Meghan did not function as a creative team. They functioned as a couple going through a public identity crisis. One insider put it bluntly, they weren't making content. They were making catharsis. Let's shift our camera for a moment and zoom out. Because while Netflix was quietly unraveling, something else was happening in Hollywood meetings, something that Tina Brown touched on in her interviews. Executives grew wary of Meghan, but they grew afraid of Harry. Not afraid of him as a person, but afraid of what he might expose. He brought too much volatility, said one executive. Too much emotion. Too much unpredictability. Too much danger of backlash. Hollywood hates unpredictability. It is allergic to lawsuits, PR nightmares, and emotional spirals. The Sussex brand brought all three. And so, Netflix began backing away in subtle ways. Emails slowed. Enthusiasm faded. Executives became distant. Deadlines became flexible, which in Hollywood is code for unimportant. But Harry didn't see this. He interpreted the delays as disrespect. According to Tina Brown, he believed Netflix owed him opportunities because of his story, his trauma, his background. He thought the power dynamics he was used to in the royal family still applied. They didn't. Hollywood doesn't bow. Hollywood buys. And if your product isn't in shape, Hollywood stops buying. Here's a painful question for the audience. What happens when you leave one institution believing you were mistreated, only to discover the new institution doesn't treat you any better? This was the emotional shock Harry was not prepared for. He thought Netflix needed him. Netflix thought Harry needed them. But the most damning part? Harry did not adapt. He resisted. He questioned. He slowed progress. He unintentionally sabotaged projects. He didn't mean to. But as Tina Brown said, Harry is a man who has never fully understood the systems he's in. And then came the final blow. In one high-level meeting, details of which later leaked, Netflix executives allegedly asked a question that circulated through the industry like wildfire. What exactly are we paying for? Not the Oprah interview, not the royal exit, not the drama, not the speeches, not the headlines. What were Harry and Meghan delivering? The room fell silent. Because the answer was devastating. Nothing. Not yet. And that's when the nickname grifters, originally used by Spotify, slid into Hollywood conversations. Not literally accusing them of fraud, but accusing them of overpromising and dramatically underdelivering. It was a label Netflix wanted nothing to do with. And that's when Tina Brown delivered her coldest assessment yet. This was inevitable. She said the Sussex downfall was predictable. She said their Hollywood honeymoon would fade. She said their lack of structure would catch up to them. She said Harry's emotional instability would create chaos. She said Meghan's ambition without infrastructure would collapse. And then she dropped the line that carried through studio boardrooms like a ghost. They are not professionally equipped for this world. But the most surprising part? Tina Brown wasn't finished. She had one final revelation. One that shifted the blame even further. One that stunned even the most seasoned insiders. Because according to Tina Brown, Harry wasn't just making mistakes. He was creating a pattern. One that would have consequences far more destructive than a canceled Netflix show. And the next chapter? It's where that pattern becomes undeniable, and where Tina Brown reveals why she believes the real danger isn't Meghan's missteps. It's Harry's decisions, not the brightest bulb. When Tina Brown said those words about Prince Harry, the world gasped. But inside Hollywood? Inside the media circles? Inside the boardrooms where decisions about millions of dollars are made? People didn't gasp. They nodded. Because they had already seen it. They had already lived it. And they had already whispered it behind closed doors long before Tina Brown said it out loud. But here's the part that makes this chapter so explosive. Tina Brown didn't just call Harry, not the brightest bulb, as an insult. She said it as a diagnosis. A summary of a pattern. A pattern that, according to her, explains everything. Every failed project, every chaotic interview, every unpredictable decision, every public blunder, every uncomfortable moment when Harry seemed to contradict himself in real time. Let's start with the moment insiders realized something was off. It wasn't during the Oprah interview. It wasn't during the Netflix series. It wasn't even during the rollout of his memoir. It was during a private meeting between the Sussex team and a group of top-tier Hollywood producers. A meeting in which Harry allegedly made a series of comments that stunned the room. One producer who later spoke off-record described it like this. He kept mixing personal grievances with creative direction. We couldn't tell if he was pitching content or venting trauma. Another executive put it more bluntly. It was like he didn't understand the difference between a storyline and a complaint. That is a brutal assessment, because it reveals exactly what Tina Brown meant. Harry's biggest vulnerability, the emotional rawness that made the world love him when he was a child, had become his biggest professional liability as an adult. Think about the contradiction for a moment. Harry wants privacy. Harry wants healing. Harry wants the world to leave him alone. Harry wants peace. But what does he do? He signs deals with Netflix. He writes a tell-all memoir. He does documentaries. He does interviews. He relives trauma on camera. He broadcasts family conflict globally. He turns his pain into product. That contradiction is the beating heart of his downfall. And Tina Brown saw it long before Hollywood did. Let's walk through the most telling examples. The moments that made insiders whisper that Harry wasn't thinking strategically, wasn't reading the room, and wasn't preparing for consequences. Example number 1. The climate change speech while flying private jets. This one spread through Hollywood like wildfire. Harry passionately lectured the world about carbon footprints while jetting around on private planes. Executives winced. PR teams panicked. Tina Brown later said, "He's not aware of the optics." That's a polite way of saying he doesn't think things through. Example number 2. The I Want Privacy Tour. Netflix promotion. Oprah sit-down. Advertisement deals. Magazine covers. A global press run. Harry repeated, "We just wanted privacy," while doing the exact opposite of what someone seeking privacy would do. Hollywood had a word for this. Self-contradiction. Tina Brown had another. Lack of strategic awareness. Example number 3. The memoir disaster. Spears sold millions, but damaged him more than it helped him. Why? Because Harry didn't understand that not all honesty is wisdom. Not all truth is strategy. Not all vulnerability should be sold. When he revealed details like killing 25 Taliban fighters, intelligence officials were horrified. Military veterans distanced themselves. Even friendly press outlets raised eyebrows. It was a moment where, according to Tina Brown, Harry showed deep emotional impulsiveness with no understanding of fallout. Example number 4. The Kate and William stories. Harry wanted sympathy. He expected moral support. Instead, he got public backlash. That miscalculation, thinking the world would universally take his side, was another example of what Tina Brown called emotional decision-making without foresight. And here's where Hollywood insiders began connecting the dots. They weren't looking at one mistake. They were looking at a pattern of misjudgment so consistent it became predictable. One agent said, "He doesn't understand how quotes will be used." A director said, "He doesn't understand how the industry interprets him." A PR strategist said, "He doesn't know what strengthens his brand versus what weakens it." Tina Brown summed up all 3 concerns in one line. He's not a strategist. He's reactive. Reactive. That word appears again and again in industry conversations. Because Harry doesn't plan his moves. He reacts to pain. He reacts to emotion. He reacts to triggers. He reacts to Meghan's direction. He reacts to the past. He reacts to the press. He reacts to things most celebrities would ignore. And that is a disaster in a place like Hollywood. Let me ask the audience directly. Have you ever watched someone whose emotions run the show? Someone who can't separate what they feel from what they do? Someone who makes decisions in the heat of the moment and regrets them later? That's how Tina Brown describes Harry. A man with a deep heart, a wounded soul, and no strategic filter. But then comes the next layer of this chapter. The part that shifts from personal missteps to professional consequences. Hollywood tolerated Harry's contradictions at first. They excused his emotional volatility. They even tried to adapt to it. But then Spotify dropped them. And not quietly, loudly. Bill Simmons, Spotify's head of podcast innovation, called them grifters on air. And while the public fixated on that one word, Hollywood insiders were talking about something else entirely. Simmons revealed he had a meeting with Harry. He described it as one of my best stories, implying it was chaotic, unprofessional, or bizarre. He mocked Harry for not having any real direction. And that was the moment Hollywood collectively realized something. Harry wasn't the visionary of the Sussex brand. He was the liability. Tina Brown later compared Harry's role in the Netflix and Spotify failures to a man trying to lead a ship without knowing how to read a map. Hollywood agreed. "He's not the brightest bulb" wasn't an insult. It was an industry assessment. But this chapter goes even deeper. Because according to Tina Brown and several insiders, Harry's emotional impulsiveness didn't just cause problems. It actively sabotaged projects. Take the Netflix docuseries. One producer claimed Harry insisted on inserting passages that contradicted previous statements they had made publicly. Another insider said he wanted to censor certain scenes because he feared the royal family's reaction, only to later insist on including more sensational material. In other words, he was inconsistent. And inconsistency is the enemy of storytelling. It's the enemy of production. It's the enemy of brand building. Another example, Harry's sudden decision to sue the British government over security arrangements. He launched the lawsuit right in the middle of Netflix filming, dragging cameras, PR teams, and executives into a legal mess they never wanted to be associated with. One Hollywood insider said, "We didn't understand why he kept opening new wounds while trying to launch a media company." Tina Brown said it even more clearly. "He is driven by unresolved hurt, not professional logic." And that is the core of this chapter. Harry is not stupid. He is not incompetent. He is not malicious. He is emotionally overwhelmed. And in Hollywood, emotional overwhelm masquerading as leadership is a recipe for collapse. But here's the twist. The part that makes this entire chapter explosive. Netflix insiders didn't believe Meghan was the mastermind dragging Harry in the wrong direction. They believed Harry was dragging Meghan. One insider said, "There were moments Meghan looked embarrassed. She was trying to keep things on track, but Harry would go off on emotional tangents." Another said, "She's ambitious. She wants to deliver, but she's dealing with a husband who is still fighting ghosts." And Tina Brown? She confirmed what Hollywood suspected. Meghan may make professional errors, but Harry is the accelerant. Harry is the one who escalates. Harry is the one who reacts. Harry is the one who can't separate personal pain from public action. But the most shocking part of Tina Brown's insight? She believes this pattern, this emotional impulsiveness, this misjudgment, this instability, didn't start with Meghan. It started decades ago, long before Hollywood, long before the royal exit, long before the Netflix contract. And that brings us to the next chapter, where Tina Brown reveals Harry's deepest flaw and how Meghan unintentionally magnified it to catastrophic levels. Because the real danger, according to Tina Brown, is not that Harry makes mistakes. It's that he can't recognize them. If there is one sentence Tina Brown uttered that captured the entire Harry-Meghan saga, it wasn't grifters, it wasn't a flop, and it wasn't even the viral line, "Harry is not the brightest bulb." It was this: Meghan has made more professional mistakes in 3 years than most people make in a lifetime. That line didn't trend. It didn't make headlines. It didn't become a meme. But inside Hollywood, inside publishing, inside PR, inside royal circles, that sentence hit like a lightning bolt. Because it wasn't hyperbole. It was an assessment, a summary, a warning. And it came from someone who knows exactly what professional self-sabotage looks like. Let's start with the part no one likes to admit. Meghan Markle had everything she needed to succeed in Hollywood. She had name recognition. She had a global platform. She had a massive fan base. She had leverage. She had connections. She had the sympathy of millions. She had the opportunity to become one of the most influential women in the world. And according to Tina Brown, she squandered it. Not overnight. Not through one bad decision, but through a pattern. A series of professional miscalculations so consistent, so preventable, and so unprecedented that even the most seasoned Hollywood veterans were stunned. Let's break them down, because this is where Tina Brown's insight becomes brutal. Mistake number 1. Believing fame equals longevity. This is Meghan's biggest and most common miscalculation. When she stepped into Hollywood after leaving the royal family, she believed her fame guaranteed her space. She believed her story guaranteed her audience. She believed her status guaranteed her relevance. Hollywood doesn't work like that. Fame is a door. It gets you inside, but it doesn't keep you inside. Output keeps you inside. Skill keeps you inside. Consistency keeps you inside. Delivery keeps you inside. Meghan misread this. And it showed. Mistake number 2. Overexposure. Tina Brown said Meghan burned through public sympathy faster than anyone I've ever seen. That's an astonishing claim, because managing sympathy is one of the oldest strategies in Hollywood. You reveal just enough to gain empathy, but not so much that you exhaust the audience. Meghan did the opposite. She revealed everything, all at once, over and over, repetitively, exhaustively. She told the story in Oprah, then retold it in Netflix, then retold it in podcasts, then retold it in print interviews, then retold it in Harry's book, then retold it in magazine features. She didn't build anticipation. She drowned it. And Hollywood noticed. One executive said, "We don't know what else she has left to say." Another said, "She exhausted the narrative too quickly." And Tina Brown summed it up like this: she mistook attention for longevity. Mistake number 3. Underestimating the institution she left. Meghan told the world she escaped the monarchy. What she underestimated was the monarchy's ability to survive without her. And this was one of her most significant professional errors. Assuming the royal family would collapse under the weight of her revelations. It didn't. In fact, public support for the monarchy increased immediately after the Oprah interview. Support for Meghan decreased. Tina Brown pointed out something fascinating. The monarchy has survived wars, scandals, divorces, abdications, and tragedy. It will not be undone by one interview. But Megan didn't think strategically. She thought emotionally. She acted from pain, not foresight. And it cost her. Mistake number 4, forgetting Hollywood hates unpredictability. This mistake, according to Tina Brown, is where everything began crumbling. Hollywood loves ambition. It loves confidence. It loves reinvention. What it hates: inconsistency, drama, confusion, unclear direction, unrealistic expectations, and emotional volatility. Megan brought all of those with her. One producer said, "We didn't know which version of Megan we'd get each day." Another said, "She had big ideas, but no structure."